Let's talk for a bit about the Diablo series. If you somehow have never played the Diablo series, it's a top-down isometric dungeon crawler with an emphasis on randomized dungeons, dark story, and interesting themes. But like all RPGs, it has always been about a hero staying hydrated with potions. I've been playing the Diablo series since I was 8, and I'm a huge fan. I'm very excited about Diablo 4, and everything I've seen released for the game. I thought I'd have a friendly discussion on important topics that might not be super evident. I still play Diablo 1 and 2, and even before I started playing myself, I used to look over my brother's shoulder as he played the first game. And since then, I've continued to play Diablo 1 and 2 ever since. Diablo 2 seems like a pretty modern game to me, even with the original graphics. It holds up well, to be honest. I just made another new character, and got another Boazon into hell. I honestly kind of prefer the aesthetic of the original version compared to the remake. At the time of making this video, Diablo 4 hasn't been released, but there is a lot of teaser material out. I want to tie all of the Diablo series together in this discussion along with the new game. Before we get into the weeds, let's hear a quick word from our indie video game developer sponsor, www.strategicgalaxy.com. When I first played the first game as a kid, one of the things that stood out the most and made one of the larger impressions was the fear factor. Part of this was the slow walking pace and introduction to the game, but a lot of it was the traditional approach to horror. When I think back to first encountering the Butcher, it isn't the monster design or even the town that stand out, although both were essential, particularly the gloomy town. It was the descent into a church, a once theoretically good place that had been twisted to evil, as evidenced by the increasing amounts of horror found. By the time the first boss is encountered, the frequency of disfigured, mutilated, and frankly tortured corpses around is staggering, and finally reaches a crescendo in the Butcher's room. A similar ramping up of the horror can be found in Diablo 2's first act, but in a much slower way, ending in Andriel's room full of body pillars. The gore and horror in the series can be excellent, and is essential, but I just wanted to caution that simply draping Halloween dressings everywhere without pacing can lose some of the excellent impact the series can have. The tortured corpses at the start of Tristram are chests full of gold, but are built up to very gut-wrenchingly scary and realistic. They don't need really any dramatic introduction, as they are well placed, paced and contextualized along with a good payoff. Hell has literally been set loose. Don't be afraid to scatter around some bodies. Diablo 1 had people on racks all over the place. Though the rest of the game, both the first and the second, can have good body horror, or gore later on, the opportunity for build-up was not missed, and is well done in the second game. Each act is build-up, and there is build-up from act to act culminating in the final act, but acts 1 to 3 start in slow personal way that build up and characterize the new location/characters. I also wanted to say that I really enjoy the text logs/dialogue, and lore in the game, particularly 1 and 2. It is dark, and moody, and builds the story slowly and confidently. In addition to setting the correct mood, it pairs well with the music and really brings across the horror and apocalyptic dread felt by many of these people who are all too aware that literal hordes of monsters prowl the night. Particularly in Diablo 1, and Acts 1 through 3 of Diablo 2, this sense of people barely scraping by, and doing the best they can against the unknowable and hopeless horrors besetting them is expertly crafted. Though I enjoyed many parts of 3 after the Reaper of Souls expansion, everyone is far too aware of their place in the world of Sanctuary, and the overall conflict in progress. This robs them of some of their fear of the unknown, and the player of some of the joy of discovery, and conquering of the unknown. Think of the Lord of the Rings. The Silmarillion explains much of the world, but the most compelling stories comes from zoom-ins on the world and characters. Remember that the story of 1 starts off as finding out what exactly happened to the king's son, and the evil bishop, and Diablo 2's story was focused around following the Dark Wanderer. Angels and demons are secondary to the places corrupted, or history around the trapping of demons, and also appear later in story. Every act in Diablo 2 save the last starts off slow, and this benefits the game greatly. I enjoyed the gameplay of Diablo 3, but the pacing and theme of the game went downhill drastically after the Doom of Wortham. Had the game progressed from there to some of the ghost cities in the final act of Reaper of Souls, it would have helped the initial release. Some high points are the town attacked by demons, and the spider cavern. I enjoyed the spider itself, as well as the dungeon, but more could have been done for the lore and story aspects. I hope storytelling makes a strong appearance in 4's main and side quests. Coupled with a sense of dread around the towns or environments, and darkness or fear in the world, it could make for a compelling mood in the video game if paired with rich personal narratives. Excellent controller gameplay of 3 aside, the complaints about the cartoony aspects are somewhat correct, but miss the storytelling aspects, and the need for horror. The 4th act of Diablo 2 earns its grand scale, and explanations of the world from having a tightly focused and atmospheric build-up. It brings angels and demons into conflict, and has huge stories to tell affecting the whole world of Sanctuary, but still manages to have some of the gorsiest horror saved for the incursion of hell into the domain of men, and Gothic architecture burned into states of ruin to keep the human aspects of death and the dangers to the world of man kept present in the player's mind. I really love the lore of this game, but when angels and demons come into play, it should be as an explanation to the essentially realistically gloomy Gothic horror, assaulted by creatures of nightmare. I read several of the Diablo books growing up as well, and it strikes me that the tight focus of the books on a few individuals and or one piece of armor from the game really says a lot about the importance of the sense of individual dread in the game. I recall strongly that the description of one necromancer spell took up an entire page, where the effects of the armor on the poor individual constituted the entire book. Even in some of the harshest fights in the book, I do not think more than a few lowly monsters were killed over the course of an entire chapter or two. Descriptions of towns, and castles or places could take tens of pages. This kind of build-up is essential in the early game, even if you want to have lots of arcadey and loop-heavy gameplay later on. It also affords you the possibility of a much more challenging game if the start in particular is rich in depth to draw the player's focus in, not to say that story and other parts are unimportant. That is to say that introducing challenging enemies at the start with exciting difficult attack patterns, or just letting a player enjoy a smaller number of monsters can be much more feasible with good storytelling. You can create senses of haunting loneliness with small numbers of enemies, or build up to large numbers of enemies appearing like Blood Raven. One of the things I was most excited about for Diablo 3 when it came out was random or really any side quests. They were some of my favorite parts of 2, and more importantly gave room for more storytelling and world building. The game doesn't feel like a grind at all when there are people to talk to, or things to discover. I enjoyed that they were included in 3, but was disappointed that the dialogue records found in-game were the main source of lore, and not small personal to in-game characters. Narratives not that found lore recordings were unappreciated, the more the merrier. The focus on gameplay in 3 was very strong, and helped with co-op, but it came at the expense of storytelling, and I missed it greatly. We were promised during the lead up to Diablo 3 lots of story building and side quests, and if any scripts were cut from 3, please put them in 4. I remember someone's head getting ripped off by Siege Breaker as a side quest, and promises of being able to meet people on piles of corpses who would have a story to tell on side quests. I'll happily give you a story for the pile of corpses guy if you don't have one, and put back in more head ripping off. People watch movies together, and I don't know why it seemed that removing story from 3 side quests would aid in co-op gameplay. Anyway, I don't mean any of this to come across as damning criticism of the series, or the upcoming Diablo 4. The tone of development on Diablo 4 seems very different from Diablo 3. I appreciate the successes of Diablo 3, its action and flow and gameplay is impressive. Though I lose the tone somewhat in Act 2 and 3 of Diablo 3, where Diablo 2 would give a player a lot of lore descriptions of monsters in the sewer/docks, in the desert, and the fall of Kurist, and simple relatable problems like the well in Diablo 1. It is promising that the developers are so enthusiastic about looking to Diablo 1, I can sympathize with people that don't like inventory Tetris, but it is a shame that the Xbox One controller doesn't by default come with a trackpad. They keep not putting inventory Tetris in, and I really enjoy kicking my feet up, and playing some ARPGs. Inventory Tetris, on a trackpad is slower, but I tend to take my time more with a controller anyway, and find that taking my time on inventory or theory crafting is enjoyable. I guess I just like to relax sometimes, and play the non-monster clicking aspects of the series. I think the developers are on the right track, but it will be challenging to bring together all of these desired aspects in the finished product. There is a lot to be learned from D3, but going back to Diablo 1 and 2 is a great focus for the game, and they seem very passionate about it. Following up on D3's action/speed, but blending in Diablo 1 and 2 story, mood, and theming is a lot to ask of a game, particularly when going open world as well. On a different note, people seem nice, but I still hope there is an option to turn off multiplayer. I find my immersion broken easily in online play in ARPGs. Seeing a boss immediately killed by another player as soon as I see it, or another player running in circles near or around me or zigzagging around naked can take me out of gameplay very easily. Also, maybe some way to re-roll the overworld via some gameplay event with a chance to re-curse the land or something would be nice. I like to play online or with others, but I don't like being forced to play online. It's fantasy. Sometimes I like to feel like the protagonist as opposed to just one of many saving the land. Even in Dark Souls you can just unplug your internet if people are being unpleasant or if you just want to enjoy the atmosphere and take it slow. Solo for at least for the campaign would be nice, otherwise there's going to be that guy who's trying to make his party laugh doing something dumb, or doing a naked speedrun when I'm trying to take lore text seriously. That key dungeon/boss seems pretty rad though too. I am glad to see that no one has been pushing auction houses though. The lack of auction houses highlights the importance that progression and smooth gameplay has on an ARPG like Diablo. I wondered occasionally in Diablo 3 if the auction house, or the increased graphical requirements detracted time away from the progression. Story benefits from a smooth gameplay experience, and this is something has occasionally been a problem for the Diablo series. I remember some enemies being frustrating to progression in Diablo 3, the sand wasp's Congo lines in Diablo 3 Act 2 being particularly sudden death prone as a glass cannon witch. But the sense of dread, or fear of my enemies in the abstract left me quickly. The Skeleton King was built up to nicely, but few other enemies had much set up. Or if they did, they lacked some of the more gruesome art I've been seeing in some of Diablo 4's updates, or were without circumstances that made them threatening. I'm reminded of the tome outside of the Countess that helps explain what's going on. Or some of the good storytelling in Diablo 2's expansion further up into the mountain. Enemies don't have to be difficult to be a threat, although I do enjoy difficulty well executed in a game. I very much enjoy being told about the threats or lore, having the enemy's characteristics alluded to, or being shown a scary story that I am being thrust into. It is much more satisfying to vanquish an enemy that feels evil. It seems like an application of skull/blood on things, and turning purple lasers red might help too. Progression is something that occurs in gameplay and in story.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go check out our sponsor at www.strategicgalaxy.com. Tired of people talking behind your back about you and your friends? Do something about it, and know your in-game chats are all the more valuable for being vulnerable. Fight for free speech. It will probably be hard to get something that is easy to learn but hard to master. And no conversation of easy to learn and difficult to master would be complete without touching on Path of Exile. Path of Exile frequently suffers from this problem even if it does other things well. Also introducing all of this well will be challenging. People miss all of the fun of Poe by following builds. The whole point of all of those options is trying new things you come up with yourself. It was one of the biggest downsides of its always online features that it restricted character experimentation. One of the things I look forward to in Diablo 4 is room for more build types than 3. I hope the importance of item character interactions makes a noticeable return, along with the cool looking new skill tree. Even a calculator doesn't account for big passive interactions, playstyle, skill gem interactions, or other side effects. The web exists to allow you to mix attributes in a structured manner. Optimality is definitely important, but it is the variety and personalization afforded that makes it a good system in an ARPG. It's true that Poe can suffer from its own wealth of options, but Poe learned much from Diablo 2 including its mods. The mods in that game allowed for more possibilities, while the base game is structured and polished while providing many options. But simply starting Diablo 2 with mods is a rare experience for new players. As I've said a few times, Diablo 4's story I think offers the most potential, but I only expect a reasonable amount of variety from Diablo 4. Diablo 2's rune words are a precursor to post-skill gems, and I think show what items can bring to characters. Plus item dependence can force randomness and adaptation on players, which can be fun. Path of Exile is definitely a bit of mess if enjoyable, but it has an impressive amount of choice. I don't like having my skill tree / web reset every so often due to online factors, but it can impose new playstyles. Last up, we should take this opportunity to talk about Diablo Immortal as well. Understandably, long-term fans who have a strong personal relationship with this series were concerned when a mobile game was announced. I initially was skeptical as well, worried that a series I really care about was being treated cavalierly or even being monetized to follow trends at the expense of quality. Nothing could be further from the case. Blizzard's extreme quality demands that slowed down the development of StarCraft 2 about decade shines through here. It is truly a console experience in a mobile form factor. This is not to say that there won't be some minor stylistic suggestions I am not wild about, but overall, it a fitting member of the Diablo series. First, the good. The game makes excellent use of its mobile setting. It handles excellently, and at no point did I find that I couldn't easily pick up and put down the game. It's a game excellently suited to both brief play times and longer play times. There's some interesting new mechanics around items. I like that the crafting has good variety on how you can recycle items and create new builds from them. Builds in Diablo Immortal are very centered around the items, and creating a new build can be very quick, and yet doesn't involve a skill tree as an integral part of your character design. The music is really top-notch and reminiscent of some of the earlier games in the series, giving me pleasant feelings of nostalgia. Not only is the music really well done, but like a lot of the rest of this series, the voice acting is excellent. It's nice to have your character narrated, and even if it isn't present in all of the games, it is well done here. There's some really fantastic art design as well. A lot of the environments really excellent. The tundra sticks out as being nice. The areas present show nice diversity, and generally are very well themed. I have a few small quibbles, like with the lampposts, for example, in the main town. Torches would have been more appropriate. But overall, they do a great job of keeping the darker gothic themes present and the player's mind. And because the game attempts to incorporate some of the mobile or social features that I never used, there is the occasional place for non-gothic art style, even if it isn't something generally in keeping with the themes of the Diablo series. And if you want to enjoy a very Diablo experience, you can do your best to avoid these areas and keep the theme in a darker tone, more in keeping with the general storyline of the game. The art style is extremely reminiscent of Diablo 3, an impressive feat for a mobile game. And that art style is almost more appropriate for mobile game. I can have a darker game when playing by myself. But when people are looking over my shoulder, it's nice to have a more artistic rendering of the subjects of the Diablo series. All of the art style is expertly crafted, though, showing great attention to detail, and is more appropriate for a mobile game, even if it isn't as serious as some of the rest of the series. On the downside, there are some points in the game in which there are pauses in the gameplay where you have to grind, and that can really break the flow of the story, which is a shame when it is overall very competent. Now, the grind that's being necessitated is fun. It was fun in Diablo 3, and it can be fun in other parts of the Diablo series. But, stopping the story just to have a grind really isn't a good gameplay strategy. It draws away from good aspects of the game, and forces you to not enjoy the parts that you would like to enjoy. It means that if you want to challenge yourself at the same time as enjoying the story, you can't. Part of the fun of this kind of RPG is the problem solving that comes from combining your gear skills and abilities as a player to overcome challenges to get to that next exciting part in the story. Rewarding yourself with story by overcoming challenges with the materials available to you. I like the freedom to choose, and this barrier hasn't been present in other games. The mandatory grind found me often exploring story-related dungeons before I got to them in a story context, negatively impacting my experience with the story. I understand that the goal is to introduce the player to more gameplay, mechanics and parts of the game they might have otherwise overlooked. And that in a mobile context where you want a player to pick up and play, focusing on gameplay, makes sense from a gameplay design sense, but just let players explore the game and experience it the way they want to. Take a look at our sponsor at www.strategicgalaxy.com. It's developed by a lone bedroom programmer, it has no paid content whatsoever, it's not paid to win, and you can play it on your phone, your computer or your tablet. I've played some of the Paragon parts of the late game, and even though there are some side quests with good storytelling, the grind is still often mandatory. Even with some of the side quests having good story, and the gameplay being great, it's a shame that the developers would have different good aspects of the gameplay against each other to the overall detriment of the game. I feel a little bad criticizing a game I didn't pay for, and there are a lot of paid options in this game. I just didn't touch any of them. I can't speak to whether or not they changed the gameplay or not. But I thought I ought to mention that they are there. It's worth mentioning though that at least for Diablo 3 and Diablo 2 and Diablo 1 you can buy used copies or just borrow one from a friend. And get an enjoyable experience in a reasonable amount of time while playing on a budget. We could talk more about the books, and the rest of the lore, but we need to start wrapping things up. Diablo 1 and 2 are absolute classics with so few flaws that I struggle to even criticize them, particularly with all of the mod options available. For me, at least the Diablo 3 story, without the Reaper of Souls expansion, wasn't a very good game. With the Reaper of Souls, it's a very good and well-rounded story. I feel though, that the story in Diablo Immortal has a good arc. Diablo 4 is very promising, and I look forward to the release. I just wanted to put my 2 cents out there, that though 3 post-Reaper of Souls was good, it left me saddened that there was not more story told, or atmosphere built. It had great gameplay, particularly with the controller. Please add PC controller support. Also let me tab drop blows and names, as I like to play inventory Tetris, while listening to the music, and soaking in my environment/kills, but the game has so much more to offer. Also, I don't mean to say that the occasional action or cheerful moment can't be in the game, but I heard someone recently say something like if a parent is okay with what they see in Diablo 4 then it isn't scary enough. And I agree, horror is an excellent genre. Shelley's Frankenstein, Lovecraft, Poe, and many more are all excellent artists who work mainly with shadows in the human soul. Fear and terror are excellent themes to work with, and you shouldn't shy away from horror. It has much to offer. Fear humanizes characters, and I want to stay a while and listen around a spooky campfire, or in a gloomy cursed town. I've got several Diablo 2 characters in the 90s, and I've how many maxed out Diablo 3 characters hardcore or otherwise. Similarly, I can't even guess how many times I've beat Diablo 1, read the books, and liked Immortal. It's a great series. If somehow you haven't played it, go try it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to check out our indie sponsor for free at www.strategicgalaxy.com. Please like and subscribe.